Buried deep in the lineage of David, there is a man marked for life by his name. A man who thousands of years later would rise from obscurity because of a humble, heartfelt prayer. Experience God's blessing for your life. The prayer of Jabez.
Never again feel this temptation is too big for me. It's not true, or else God's a liar. God doesn't want you to sin. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's hard to believe we're in the last session, session 8 in the series, The Prayer of Jabez. I feel, as we come to this last session, that we've covered so much Bible together. In just really 4 hours, 8 half-an-hour sessions, talking about what does the prayer of Jabez look like if you took it through the Old and New Testament. We've talked about so many things about being blessed and how God feels about that, and that he wants to be asked. In fact, that Jesus commands you, I want you to ask my Father, and he will give you good things. We talked about the different types of blessings, and that we should give God the opportunity to have his heart warmed by having him respond to our invitation to bless us. It's wonderful. Second thing we talked about is to enlarge your territory or border. We pointed out that the territory really was business, and we encourage you to pray for your business. Ask God's blessing upon it to make it grow. That's not more godly to ask God to bless a church than it is your business. One isn't more godly than another. And if your business is God-honoring, why wouldn't he want to bless it? I was just with a man recently who handed me a card, and he said, I want you to read this. He said, years ago, I had no money, and I wanted to give the ministry, give ministries, churches, money. He said, I began to ask God to give me a lot of money. He said, last year, I gave away $854,000. That is because God answered my prayer. Expand my border. Give me more ministry. We talked about this whole issue that most people don't want that because they don't really understand why they should want it. That one of the whole issues of why God leaves us here on earth after we accept Christ is to prepare for heaven. To serve him here faithfully and to make choices for him over you and to do what he wants. And to ask him for more and more and more. And that your territory is supposed to continue to enlarge without end. There is no end. And that there's so few people today who are really begging God. I don't mean asking. I mean begging God. Let me do more for you. This whole issue, sometimes we're the hindrance to our own prayer, aren't we? Sometimes it's because we have something in our life that stops God's blessing. Sometimes there's a sin. Sometimes there's a wrong relationship. That when you're in the middle of praying and you're wondering, why doesn't God answer? There's a reason. There's a reason why he says no. I remember one person came up to me and she said, how can you tell people to pray for God's blessing if they're living in sin? I said, well, ma'am, this prayer is self-correcting. If you start praying, God, keep me away from evil, guess what will happen? It'll stick in your throat. And you'll either stop praying the prayer or you'll fix it up. Don't worry about it. And besides, God can say no if he wants to say no. So this whole issue of the territory growing, and that all of us face the border bullies, aren't they real? And that we have to break through them, and that they're no different for any of us. It is so untrue to think my border bullies are bigger than yours, or that my borders are littler than yours, and it's easier for me, or it's easier for you. That's a lie. That's not true. And when David came to fight Goliath, you have to understand, it was extremely difficult for him to do that. He realized, I'm putting my life at stake. And he put his trust in God, but his life was still at stake. And it never gets easier. Even though we remember more and more from the past of what God's done, the next time you come to the border, you'll fight it again. Then we talked about the fact that as the borders increase, you'll realize you're out on thin ice. You cannot do this. And the more it goes out, the more you know it. And you realize that unless God comes through for you, there's no way it can possibly come true. And that's where you fall before him and ask him to release his power. And we try to deal with a very big issue here, that God wants to release his power. It's not that we try to convince him, but instead he's looking to and fro across the whole face of the earth. And the Hebrew there means he does this continually. It's not like he did it once and then stopped. He just looks to and fro. He has a purpose. I'm trying to find somebody who actually meets my hand and whose heart is perfect, or loyal is the best word, complete toward him, so that I can show myself strong. God loves to show himself strong. Why? Because at that moment, when he does show himself strong, that's where everybody who watched can say, that was God. Look what God did. Wow, that's giving God glory. But so many times, God, in a sense, can't find somebody who needs his arm. And therefore, we're withholding the glory that God can receive if we just went after it some more. Before we move into this last half of Keep Me From Evil, I want to just make a comment. Because the more you do this, as the years go by, you will change. You will try to pray yourself into Jabez and how he thought. You know, there's no magic in the words. Jabez was more honorable than his brethren, and God granted his request. But really, what you're doing is praying the will of God over and over and over again. Does God want to bless us? Yes. Does God want to use us more in ministry? Of course. Does God want his hand upon us? Of course. Does God want us to keep us from evil? Of course. You're praying directly in the center of God's will. That's why God says yes. You're not praying something he doesn't want to do. You're praying something he wants to do. But in time, he will teach you more than I'm teaching you here. He will go deeper than this with you, because there's more to it than this. This is a lot. This is enough. But there's a lot more to it. And the more you do it year after year, you'll have to learn new truths from his word. And you'll have to learn how to fight and stand. You'll have to learn how to become more holy than you used to be. You'll have to learn, or else you'll get stuck. You'll have to learn, how does God really release his hand? And God will ask you for more and more. Because the more you do this, the more you're switching something. You're switching your life for what he wants. You are. I need to say that to you. Back here, in the middle of a comfort zone, you basically do what you want. It doesn't have to be sin, you just do what you want. And as time goes on, God asks you to do something that he wants. Well, typically, that's not what you want. Or else you'd have gone and done it before. That's why it's so hard. Not my will, but yours. That isn't my will, that's your will. But my will is choosing to do your will. And in time, he'll be asking for a trade. It starts out, it feels huge at the beginning, but when you get over there, you realize how little it was. He asks, will you give me something that you want so you can have more of me? And pretty soon the things you used to value here, you start setting them aside. You're setting them aside. And the things you used to say, oh, this was so important to me, you say, it's not really that important to me anymore. This is important to me. That didn't used to be important to me. And the more you're doing that, the more you're trading things, something of you, for more of him. And he asks for more. That's the truth. He does. The further you walk with him, the more he asks of you. Give me more of you, he says. He'll ask that about your money. He'll ask you that of your service. He'll ask you that of your time. He'll ask you that of your dreams. Until as time goes by and the years go by, everything else has died in your life. Meaning, it's not of value to you like it used to be. Until all that's left is one person. Jesus Christ is left. Because you've chosen him, all that pilgrimage you've come to, until all that's left is him. And that's all that you want. And you've switched your life. And you count all the things that used to be valuable to you, like Paul said, is worthless for the sake of Christ. To know him, listen to this, and to know the power, his power. And his power comes through a man or a woman more and more if you die to yourself more and more. And that's the price tag. And maybe that's why so few people ever experience this. It's a lot more expensive than you know. It costs everything. but you're switching everything that you have, that you value so deeply, to something that's worth a million times more. It's real life. This is real life. And Christ offers to you and to me abundant life. Abundant. And abundant life just isn't salvation in heaven. It's not just a forgiveness of sins. It's abundant life today, right here, in which you can say to God anytime that you want, Lord, I want you to use me more. Please send me somebody who needs you, and then turn around and start a conversation and eventually open the door. I don't know how you want to open it. I open it the same way. I say, what can I do for you? Or what's troubling you? Or if God could do one thing for you, what would you want him to do? Just try it. And the Holy Spirit will help you. And you will never feel, my life has no significance, or I'm not doing anything that makes that much difference to anyone. You'll never even have that thought into your mind. You know your life is pleasing to God, and to be honest with you, it's pleasing to you. It's pleasing to you. Because all of us have inside of our hearts a sense of destiny. We do. We have something greater than ourselves inside of us that God put inside of us. It's the image of God in us, and it's his whisper to us. I have a wonderful future for you, and I want to be in partnership with you to accomplish great things. That is true. And there isn't a man or woman or boy or girl who doesn't want to do great things for God. There is not one, unless you rebel against God. But if you're not rebelling against him, and you and I got in a conversation, and we got to trust each other a little bit, and I were to say to you, just between the two of us, down deep inside of your heart, do you or do you not really want to do something significant for God? What would you say? I know what you'd say, because I've asked it of so many people. Sometimes people will change the subject, and I'll bring it right back to the same question. And to this date, all over the world, the answer is people will kind of look down a little bit, say, you know, you're right, but I lost the dream somewhere along the way. That's all right. It's fine. It's not the past. Forget the past, like Paul said. You can't fix it. Don't cry over it anymore. Just forget it. Turn around. Say, okay, Lord, let's go. By the way, I'm going to try this Jabez thing. Really go after it. And then you're in front of the adventure of your lifetime. You are. And as God comes through more and more, he'll ask you more and more. And the last other observation I want to make is back here, he'll ask you to take a little step. It'll feel like a big step because you haven't walked much. But he'll ask little, and then he'll take a little bigger step, and a little bigger step. And as you grow in faith in him, you're going in faith in him, he'll start asking you to take some awfully big steps that, humanly speaking, you know there's no way that can possibly come true unless God comes through. And I want you to understand that will come to you too. He will ask you to do things that you know is impossible. Expect it, anticipate it, and he will have prepared you. Just turn around and look at the bears and the lions that are always there before Goliath. Okay? Now I want to just close in these few minutes we have left talking about the perspectives of Keep Me From Evil. And this perhaps will be the most personal part of our 8 series. Just as I want to talk to your heart a little bit about what are the serious things you may face. And I want to make it clear to you that when I was preparing this talk, I struggled a long time about this one. I did. Trying to decide, what should I share? Because there's so many things you can share about this topic, about Keep Me From Evil. And I was struggling with, should I deal with the things that happened back here? Or should I go further out and get a little bit more on the front line? And I decided after quite a bit of praying and thinking about it, that I want to share with you the temptations that come to those men and women and young people who really start living this way. So many of you may never even identify with this. It's those people that are going to keep on going, that you're going to have some temptations that come along to you that are different a little bit. And you know, it doesn't take many people to change the world for God. It doesn't. It takes really a few handfuls. Because the power of God plus one is the whole world. It's the whole world. And it's that group I want to talk to in this closing session. About the temptations you're going to face and the temptations that I have faced and will continue to face. Point number one. You need to pray to keep me from evil due to the temptation of pride. Of pride. James chapter 4 says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Back over here in our lives, we think we have things we're proud of, and we do. And there's nothing the matter with a healthy degree of, this was good. You know, if somebody says to you, that was really good, don't always say, God did that. You did that. God used you. Say thank you. Say thank you. And if they're thinking too much you did that, then say, wait a minute now. I did the best I could, but you know who's behind all this. But don't be super spiritual about life. Just say thank you. I don't know if I should say that, you know, but as time goes on, however, if you really keep going through this, God will keep on enlarging your territory. You're going to be a different person than you used to be. Honest statement. And you will say, usually at night, I don't know what happened in my life. Man, is it ever different than it used to be? And if you learn how to cooperate with God's hand, you will see God do things which blow you away. And if you don't watch out, this little issue of pride will sneak right in. Whoa, you must be somebody. You know what I mean? It doesn't come that arrogantly. It just comes a little bit at a time. Till finally you start thinking, it's God in me doing this thing. Now it is God in you, but not really. It's God. And I remember one story that for many years I couldn't understand. And we've used this man over and over again. I respect him greatly. In the Bible, his name was Moses. And he went through some tough times leading the people. And finally the people were rebelling against God and there was no water. And God said, go speak to the rock. And you remember what Moses did? He took that rod, he came over to the rock, and he didn't speak to it. He demonstrated anger. And I don't think he tapped the rock, do you? He flat out hit the rock, like hitting the rock has something to do with the water. Must we, listen to these words, must we bring water out of the rock? Moses! Hey Moses! God, hold up for a minute. Moses, hit the rock again. Show me how much water you can get out of the rock. My friends, that's a real challenging moment. Must we do something? That's where pride comes in. It is not you. It is not me. It's not even 1/10 me or 100th me. I'm doing my part, but it's 100% him. And the second you think it's we, is the second you're in danger. Make sense? Number 2. Pray, keep me from evil due to the temptation of power. The temptation of power. Now, why did I put this in here? Because I see this all of the time. What do I mean? You may have power in business here. As time goes on, if you keep asking God, and God keeps enlarging your territory, and his power comes on you, you're going to be looked up in the position that you're in. And if you don't watch out, you'll start acting like you're somebody. And you'll be wanting some extra special privileges. And you'll be acting toward other people, as Jesus says, lording it over them. Because of what? Because of what God has done. And this is something that doesn't come all of a sudden. It kind of sneaks up on you. And I find I always got to watch myself. Am I demonstrating in my life or in my attitudes this arrogance of power because of what God's been doing? Just pay attention to your tone of voice. Pay attention to how pushy you are, or how easily you listen to somebody else's opinion about something. Or do you flat out think, well, God's using me this way, I know better than you do. Oh, God can stop losing you quick. So be careful. This issue of power. Number 3. I think this one trips people up the second most. The second most. Pray, keep me from evil due to the temptation of possessions, of money, of of the desire for money. I want you to look at this passage, 1 Timothy chapter 6. Look at it carefully in your workbook. But those who desire to be rich, look at those words. Those desire to be rich fall into something. They fall into temptation and a snare. And they fall into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. That's what we're talking about, evil. For which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. What a profound passage. This is such a test. Who's that letter of 1 Timothy written to? A pastor. It's to a pastor. It's by Paul to Timothy, saying, Timothy, be careful about your love of money, of wanting more and more things. Why? Because you will fall into a whole bunch of temptations you didn't have before. If you didn't have a love of money, you wouldn't be tempted in all these ways. But if you do, let your heart get that love of money, the love of wealth, the love of more and big and better all of the time. You will, this is one of the most dramatic word pictures in the New Testament. You will take up a spear and you will pierce yourself through. That's what it says. They pierce themselves through. How does this work? And why is it in the Jabez life? It's in the Jabez life because as God begins to use you more and more and more, not always, but sometimes, money comes your way. It's amazing. It just comes your way. And it's really a test from God about can you be trusted with the money or not? Will you change your mind and make money as your primary motive, or is serving God your primary motive? I remember years ago, Darlene and I were in California at a conference, and I had spoken that morning, and we went back to the hotel. The hotel was had a big cover in the middle and a big atrium, and we were holding hands walking through the middle of this, talking together, and there were these tables with these umbrellas over it, and there was a couple that I didn't know. As we walked through this way, they were right here. And we started walking, and they called us back over, and I came over, and he said, oh, you need to come to my church and give that talk to our church. I said, well, fine, just write me a letter. No, I mean, really, you need to come. Thank you, just write me a letter. No, I'll tell you what, we'll give you a big honorarium. Thank you, just write me a letter. No, we'll give you $5,000. Write me a letter. No, I want you to really come. Then she looked at Darlene and said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you the $5,000, and you and your wife, I'll give us a week's free vacation in Hawaii. And I looked at him and I said, you know, sir, do you know what you're saying to me? That my motive to come to you is that if you pay me enough, then that's why I'll come. I said, if that was my motive, would you want me to come? Don't write me a letter. And I left. 6, 7, 8 months later, I was back where this man had a big church. And I was preaching in a different church. And I asked the man in this church about that man, because I didn't know him. He said it's a sad story. A couple weeks ago, he was arrested because of what he did with money and some investments with money from the church, and they may put him in prison. And I thought to myself, what was that man trying to motivate me to do? That which motivated him to do. What motivated him to do is give me more money and I'll do it. The truth of it is, don't be motivated to serve God on the basis of money. It happened to me last week. South of the airport, I was speaking at a meeting. And a man came up and said, did you get my invitation to come speak at our I said, sure. Are you going to be able to do it? No, my schedule is so full, I don't want to do it. Do you understand how much the honorarium is? I said, yes, sir, that's a very, very large honorarium. He said, well, aren't you going to take it? I said, really, no, that's not why I take speaking engagements. And he had this stunned look. And I found years ago, never ask how much anything is going to come to you. And never once make any decision in ministry based upon what you get. Be careful. So many people in ministry get tricked up in this whole issue. and they die inside over the years. Next is the biggest one. Pray, keep me from evil, through the temptation of pleasure. Of pleasure. I don't mean good pleasure, I mean sinful pleasure. Put the word lust after this. Took the word immorality next to this. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Now the body is not for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. Flee sexual immorality. Why do I include this? This is the number one reason why men and women whose God's arm is using in a powerful way end up in the ditch. Number one. Put all the other four put together, this is bigger. This is larger. Why does this happen this way? I can only offer you a suggestion. There's two sides to it. One side of it is, as God uses you more and more, certain people are attracted to power of the opposite sex. Some men are attracted to women of power, and women are attracted to men of power. That's why you could see in Washington, D.C. so much immorality. And secondly, somehow, when power comes, the fleshly side of you is raised in some way, and the desire for immorality is a stronger temptation. And the third thing, it appears to me that Satan comes really against the man or woman in sexual temptations very hard from time to time. I want you to realize this can happen to anybody, and it can happen to you. And there never is an announcement, tomorrow at 4 o'clock, a temptation is coming, watch out. It never shows up like this, it never does. I was eating dinner with a man, you would know his name. We were having a Mexican restaurant in Southern California. He said, Bruce, let me tell you what happened last weekend when I was at the conference speaking. I said, what happened? He says, well, I got in the night before and I was late and I had 2 bags. I checked in and I was away from home for a week, and I got into the elevator and I put my bags down. He said, just before the doors closed, 2 beautiful young ladies, he was in his early 60s, came right in and stood on either side. I said, you are kidding. He said, no. Then they each took one of my arms and said to me, come on, big boy, let's spend the night. I said, you're kidding me. If I told you his name, you'd burst out laughing. I said, what'd you do? He says, well, it caught me off guard. Here I am in my 60s. And then he said, I said to myself, these are very attractive ladies. I thought, maybe I should witness to them. And he turned to them and he said, ladies, I am happily married and I belong to Christ, and we will not be doing anything like this. And then he starts laughing. He's telling me this, and he has a great laugh. And he said, and then I told them, ladies, you made my night, man. Just think about this. I'm in my 60s and you're beautiful and you took this to me? He said, you made my night. Just kind of a man-to-man talk for a moment there. You know what? You never know it. Never know it. I asked a young man I've been discipling for years, I said, how you doing in this temptation? How you doing in your hotel room? How you doing when the pornography's right there and nobody will ever know? What are you doing with that? When's the last time you did that? Did you do that? When's the last time? How tempted are you? Why? That's the way life is. And he said, the other day I was in a hotel and a woman came right up to me. I was seated there for lunch, came right up to me, sat down at my table and said, I want to have sex with you. He's in his young 30s. I said, how'd you do? He said, I had never idea how hard that was going to be. I am faithful to my wife, but at that moment, I didn't want to think of my wife. This temptation is real. And the more God uses you, the more you better watch out and be like Joseph. When Potiphar's wife went after him, he said no, and just said, take my jacket and hold on, and just ran away. Flee temptation. And letter E, pray, keep me from evil due to the temptation of position. I believe this was the disciples' number one temptation. Why? They're always arguing about who's going to be the greatest, and who's going to sit on the right hand, and who's going to sit on the left hand. What is that? That's position. I want to be the chief person. You can be the second chief person. Watch out in that area. Now let's move down to the practical steps for the Jabez keep me from evil. Number one, expect temptations, especially as your territory increases. Expect temptations, especially as your territory increases. V, void the sin, which so easily ensnares you. Void the sin, nullify it, end it. Get rid of the sin which seems to be after you all the time. Because once you do, God's hand will come upon you much more. I, invite the Spirit to fill you with His presence and power. Invite the Spirit to fill you with His presence and power. And lastly, learn to stand in the power of God's might. You know, right before we came here, Darlene and I were in the back room here talking over lunch. And we were remembering some of the times that Satan came against our family. And we were reminding each other of time after time and how God came through and how painful some of it was. And the truth of it is, you must learn how to do this not from books. You learn how to do this by doing it. And you don't learn back here, my friends, because you're out of the battle. You learn over here. And I've said some sobering comments about that, but I want to underline everything. Christ is stronger than anything that comes against you at any time. And you need to be willing to become a warrior for Him. And take up the shield and the sword and the helmet and the breastplate and fight. Fight to stand. And you'll know when the fight's gone because it'll be over. Just stay standing. And if you fall to one knee, call one of your best friends and say, I'm falling. Pray for me. You're meant to stand. So what are the potential results then that could take place? Number one, you'll become more sensitive to evil and grow in holiness. You'll become more sensitive to evil and grow in holiness. Number two, you will experience that the Lord is able to keep you from sin. C, you will not cause pain, but joy to others, yourself, and to God. You will bring joy to God. You know, this whole issue of evil, the majority of you who are watching this right now, if the truth were known, if you and I could sit down, the majority of us are trapped in sin right this minute. And we've been talking about it as if sin is in front of us, where it's my experience that most of us are trapped in it. And this is such a delightful thought, but it's not true about you yet. The truth of it is, unless you get free, then all of this will just be information that never is a part of your life. And no matter what it is that's trapped you, you must get free from it. And God's power, not only Christ's death on the cross broke the penalty for your sin, but it also broke the power of the sin over you. And you and I don't have to commit that sin. I remember speaking to a group of about 800 men in the middle of the wilderness up in the Northwest. There were 800 men. There wasn't a lady there. We're there for the weekend. Nobody took a shower. Nobody shaved. It was just great. And on Saturday night, we were in this open air thing. There was no walls. It was only a roof, and the wooden bleachers, they felt like 100 years old. Just the guys were there. And I decided to speak to them about this number one sin, sexual immorality. Because I felt in the room that many of those men were trapped. And no matter how much they wanted to do for God, it was not going to happen. So at the end, after speaking about that, I came down to the gravel on the floor here. And I said to them, you know, some of you in this room are having an adulterous affair right now. Some of you are married and committing adultery, having sex with somebody else. Some of you aren't married and you're having sex with somebody else. I said, that is sin. And you're to stop that. And you're to stop it tonight. You must put your line in the sand and say, this is enough. Lord, forgive me, and then move on and stop. I said, you know, some of you need to take a quarter and go over to that telephone pole right over there. There was one phone in this part of the conference center on a tall pole with a light on it. You couldn't see it, but you could see the bottom half of it through the open area. And I said to these men, so you need to take a quarter, go put it in that telephone and call that lady that you're having an adulterous affair with and end it tonight. And say, you know what? I have sinned against you because I've broken my vows with my spouse. I've sinned against you and my sin against you, and I've sinned against God, and I apologize. I am sorry. Please forgive me. But I will never again call you. I will never write you. I'll never read or open the letter you send, and you'll never hear from me again. You need to end it. So that'll be probably the hardest telephone call you'll ever make. Because some of you love the other woman, and you stop loving your wife. But from God's point of view, stop. And God will give you back the love for your wife. And I said to the men, you know, what I want you to do is I want you to stand up wherever you may be in this room, this auditorium, and walk right down the middle, shake my hand, and look me in the eye and say, I'm going to end it tonight, and then go call. I said, if you can't do that in front of all of us, I guarantee you one thing, you won't call the lady. Well, it got real quiet, because nobody had their heads bowed. There was no choir singing, just a bunch of guys. But you know, when just a bunch of men together, you can be honest. And we were honest that whole weekend. And my heart was pounding. I was saying, Lord, show up. And off here, on about the third from the top, was a great big man who stood up and was so quiet, we heard his knees pop. And he had big boots on. He walked across, and I was standing right here. And he walked down that middle row, and his eyes never left me. And I thought to myself, this man is going to punch me. And he came right here. He's, I'm a trucker. I said, yes, sir, you are. I've been having one of those adulterous affairs for 9 years. I didn't know God was that much against it. But I'm going to stop tonight. So I put up my hand. He went right past my hand. He put his arms around me, lifted me off the ground, popped my back in 5 places, let me down, and we all watched and heard the gravel on his boots. As he walked over, walked up the side, we saw the bottom half of his legs across there, and we actually heard the quarter hit the bottom. And then I stood there, and then man after man after man came. And lives were changed. 2 o'clock in the morning, in my little cabin over here, I looked out that window with the spider webs right there. I looked out, and there was still a line of men. I want you to know, no matter what it is that you're stuck in, God wants you free. And no matter how hard it may seem, God will come through. And if you can't get free on your own, just go see your pastor or somebody else who's not stuck in that sin, and just end it so that God can come through for you. Well, these have been amazing 8 sessions together. I have many emotions as I stand here. First of all, such a gratitude in my heart for what God has done for me as an individual. That I'm unworthy and undeserving of all of this. But it's been such an exciting time to ride with God. It's almost like in the earlier days I would read about his chariot going across. And then I kept saying, Lord, I don't want to hear about it anymore. And God said, well, then come on over to where my chariot is. And as I stood there, his chariot came along and grabbed my coat in the spoke. And it's been the ride of Jabez ever since. And you know, it's been my observation that there's not enough giants in the land for God. There's not enough men, not enough women, not enough young people who really want the hand of God upon them in a mighty way. And it's my prayer to you that this course will have opened your heart and your eyes to a whole other kind of a life. And that your heart will beat like mine. Lord, please. I don't want to come to the end of my life and have you usher me into heaven and realize, here's what you had planned for me, but I never gave you a chance. God's inviting you. He brought you to this series, and now at this moment, he's waiting for a decision from you. Because God is a gentleman, if you could say it that way. He invites. He never pushes. And as I think about what verse in all of the Bible should we close with, the one that meets me the most is when Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the seraphim around were saying, "Holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty." And then you hear God saying, who can we, watch this, who can we send? Who will go for us? I love what happens next. Isaiah holds his hand up and says, "Here am I, Lord. Please send me." And isn't that the whole heart of what we've been saying for 8 sessions? Please send me. And don't send me a little bit. Send me a lot. And don't let me go by myself. Please come with me. And don't take your hand off of me. If anything, put both hands on me. And please keep me away from evil. I don't want this to end. And you know, it comes a point in an adult's life that they understand what this is all about. And it's not really emotional, it's something deeper than emotion. It's inside of your spirit. When you make a decision that this is the life I am going to live, that I don't care what it costs, I don't care how hard it is, I don't care how much I have to learn, I don't care what I have to give up so that I can gain what he wants to give me. This will be my life until I die. That's what I'm hoping will happen to a group of people across the face of the earth who rise up and be Davids with Goliaths again, and be Pauls, and be Esthers, and be Ruths, and be Nehemiahs, be men and women like in Hebrews chapter 11, men and women mighty in faith before God. And I want to invite you to think about what you should do. Some of you don't want to do this, and I understand, but some of you do. And I'm going to invite this auditorium right here, because God has been with us in these 8 sessions. And I censor some of you in this room, and maybe if you're watching me, maybe you're one of them as well. And if some of you here sense that this is God's call in your life, and there needs to be a change, a great big change, not an emotional decision, a deep change, that you're going to live this way. You're going to beg God, bless me indeed. Enlarge my ministry for you. Put your hand upon me and keep me from evil. And Lord, I'm not going to stop praying until I see you. Till I see you. And I believe it's time to make a moment in time in which everything changes. Because that's how it happens with me. I make a decision. After thinking about it, I make it, and my life changes because of it. And I believe it's time that for some of you. This isn't a course just to hear. This is a course that could change your life. But now it comes down to a decision from you. What are you going to do? And I'm going to ask those of you in this room, if you're one of those people that you know, this is why I was here. I thought I'd just be a part of this taping, but in reality, I'm here because of what God has asked me to do and to be. And I am going to make a change. And by God's grace, my life will never be the same. Then I want to just shake your hand. I do. I just want to shake your hand and meet you. And then I want you to stand behind me. So in a minute, I'm going to invite these folks here. And if you're watching and you want to be a part of that, just where you are, even if you're by yourself in your room, just stand to your feet and take a stand for this and join us. So on behalf of all of us, as we close this, and as these folks have their own moment, thanks for being a part of the Jabez miracle. When I meet you someday, maybe you come up and say, you know, I took the Jabez challenge and my life has never been the same.